Welcome, writers. My name is Rebecca Pickens. I'm a certified book coach, developmental editor, and host of Self-Editing Essentials, a group coaching program for fiction and memoir writers. Right now, I want to talk a little bit about the work that I do as a developmental editor for fiction and memoir writers. So, usually, when a writer finishes writing a book and they've done their own edits and they've maybe shown it to beta readers and good friends, the next step is really exciting. It's time to hire an editor. But the challenge is knowing what kind of editor you need. The word editor is really an umbrella term for a lot of different kinds of services. I'm a developmental editor, but you've probably also heard of line editors, copy editors, proofreaders. These are all really different jobs. So before I tell you what I do, let's look at what these different kinds of editing services are. Developmental editing is looking at a book from a very wide angle lens. It's looking at your book as a whole in terms of structure, narrative drive, character development, and character drive. It's looking at your dialogue. It's looking at your story's themes, its conflict, the stakes. It looks at if your opening is going to be strong enough to catch the attention of readers or of agents, and it looks to see if your conclusion is satisfying in the way that your genre requires it to be. So these are very high level edits that look at how your book is functioning as a whole. The second kind of editing, and it's sometimes some developmental editors, myself included, will put line editing in their developmental editing package, but not necessarily. You can hire someone just to do line edits, and you can hire someone just to do developmental edits. So this is where it becomes important to interview your editor and make sure that you know what services they do provide. A line editor is the editor who looks at the words that you've chosen and makes sure that they have cadence and flow, that there's lyricism, that there's sentence variation, all the things that make reading a pleasure to read. Now, a good line editor is going to always make sure that the suggestions they provide are true to your authentic voice. They're going to sound like you on your best day. That's a line editor. And finally, a copy editor is that person who's got an eagle eye and gets really into the nitty gritty and looks for commas and periods and semicolons. They may do fact checking. They may look for redundant language. Line editors are also going to look for redundant, repetitious language. But if it gets through their eyes, if they miss something, a copy editor can catch that kind of information as well. So I use an analogy when I'm trying to help a writer decide what kind of editing service they need. I describe it like this. Imagine you're going out to a big fancy function in the evening and you need to go shopping for it. The first thing you're going to do is decide, okay, am I going to go something really formal, really trendy? What's my style going to be? Maybe I'm going to go really casual and laid back. That's your developmental edit. That's where you're just deciding on the tone and the vibe and the feel of your work. Then you want to decide, okay, how am I going to accessorize this outfit? How am I going to make it look really complete and just really sparkle? Add some earrings. I'm going to add a bracelet. That's your line edit. That's where you're making your writing beautiful. And finally, it's that moment before you go out the door. You check to make sure that everything's buttoned and zipped like it should be. If you have any stray threads, you might want to cut those off with scissors. Just make sure that there's nothing undone. That's your copy edit. That is just that final check to make sure everything is professional and polished looking. Proofreading is a term that comes at the very end. And you wouldn't really hire a proofreader if you were doing self-editing. You would hire a copy editor. Proofreading, if you are publishing traditionally, they will produce the whole work. It will go through all the kinds of edits I've just described. And then just before it hits the shops, there's a proofreader who's going to make sure that in that entire process, nothing was left undone, that there aren't any final errors that need to be taken care of. So very rare is the editor who's going to do all of those different jobs because they require really different skill sets and they're all really specialized. And if you have a good editor, they've really studied and really practiced that specific niche. So my recommendation is always to interview your editor. Make sure you know exactly what you're paying them to do. Make sure you understand what kind of work they work on. You don't want somebody who doesn't understand your genre, especially at the developmental edit level. And make sure you pick someone who reads the kind of work that you've written. So what that looks like if you work with me is like I said, I am a developmental editor. And if the work is in pretty good shape and the developmental edits are feel manageable and aren't going to be overwhelming to you, I will also include line edits at that point. But sometimes, usually, with a developmental edit, there's going to be so much shape shifting of your manuscript. So much is likely to move around and change that to spend too much time on line editing at that stage is a little bit premature and it can be a waste of your money. So unless a manuscript is coming to me in really good shape, I will usually refrain from line editing at that stage. Typically, it takes me about 1 month to finish your manuscript. And what you will get back from me, my deliverables, are very extensive line edits on every page of your manuscript in which I look at the very things that I described a developmental edit should encompass. So I will be looking at structure. I will be looking at your characters. I'll be looking at their arcs. I will be looking at the conflict and the resolution that you put in your story. And depending on the genre, I will make sure that it aligns with industry standards, whether you're self-publishing or publishing traditionally. These are important things to consider. And I will give you, based on all the line edits that I've provided, an editorial letter after that. And an editorial letter is a really neat thing. Most editors, this is what they will provide in their package. And the way it works is we know that when we hand that manuscript back to you, we're giving you so much information. And some of it, maybe you had a hunch, you kind of wondered if the editor would agree, but some of it's going to feel brand new. It's going to catch you off guard. And it may be really exciting, it may be overwhelming. Whatever your feeling is when you get those edits back, you're going to want some kind of container with which to organize all these bits of information. And that's really what your editorial letter is. The editorial letter notes all of the recommendations coming from the editor. It may also include some questions. I like to ask questions when I'm working with a writer to kind of get them thinking about things in a new or different way. But we don't just throw all these statements down on a page. What I like to do is organize them in terms of hierarchy. So I use what's called the stoplight method. And that means that my critique, the ideas that I give you, come in 3 colors: red, yellow, or green. In cases where my feedback is very overarching, it's very much about structure. So maybe the narrative arc is just too condensed or sprawls too much. That's a very fundamental issue that you're going to want to look at before you fix anything else, because it's the element that it's the spine of your story. So if it's not working, the things I tell you about other aspects of the story don't need to be addressed yet. Want to get that spine solid and well formed. So that would be an example of a red level issue. An example of a yellow level issue, meaning it's important, it matters. It doesn't need to be taken care of until some of those larger issues are taken care of, but it's still definitely warrants your attention. Those would be examples of maybe your book is normally very funny. The tone you've established is kind of lighthearted and uh, kind of an easy breezy, funny read. And then all of a sudden in chapter 9, you got really philosophical and really reflective, and it just didn't quite match the vibe of the rest of the story. I would point that out there and say inconsistent tone, let's talk about this. What's your goal in this section? It's also a place where we might look at dialogue. If you're using a lot of dialogue and it's not necessarily necessary and it feels like it's slowing the story down, or it doesn't sound authentic. Sometimes dialogue is tough and sometimes it can be stiff or doesn't well represent the character you're writing about. That's the kind of thing we address at that level. And then finally, the green edits. Those are more in line with, they're easy fixes. They're things that we will take care of later. They could be punctuation issues. I don't typically edit for punctuation, but it's that kind of thing. Sometimes we use elevated vocabulary for a story, which is lovely. It's lovely. It can make your writing really interesting and engaging. But if you use a very unusual word and you've used it many times throughout the story, that can start to feel a little artificial if it's not a word that people are accustomed to seeing. And so I might point that out and say, "Ooh, you use this unusual word a lot. Do you want to come up with um, some more variety there?" That's the example of a green edit. It's a quick fix, but it's not a necessary fix to go to yet, because that word might not even stay in your story. That chapter might not even stay in your story. So these are the kinds of things, interestingly, that as writers, we like to tend to right away first because they're so easy, but we're really slowing ourselves down and creating extra work because so much of what's on that green light level could change possibly. So I like to encourage readers to really hold off on working on those edits until they've looked and addressed the red and yellow edits. So that's how it works. When you've finished reading your editorial letter, what I usually recommend is just sit with it for a while. It can be hard to receive editorial feedback. It can be disappointing. It can also be exhilarating and exciting. You will hear all about everything that is working well in your manuscript as well, so that you can continue to build on that success. So lots of people love getting this kind of feedback, but it's always a big deal. And so I invite writers to take a little bit of time off after they've received my feedback. And then the same package includes a 1 hour Zoom call in which we can talk all about the feedback that you've received, what your comments are, if you have questions about my feedback, comments about my feedback, and we talk about logical next steps, what you can do next in order to incorporate these edits and move your story forward. It's a really amazing learning experience. Most writers I talk to really in the end are so glad they've had a developmental edit because they understand their story in a whole new way. And it really sets them up well, not only to polish this story, but to think about writing that next story and what they might do differently. So it's a time saver for that next piece of work as well. So if this sounds good to you, if you would like to explore whether your novel or memoir is ready for a developmental edit at this stage, please reach out. There's a link where you can make an appointment for a discovery call. And I would love to answer any questions you have. And I'll have some questions for you about your work. And we can see if it's a good fit. All right. Thanks so much for watching.